My name is Reena, I'm 28, and 2 days ago I found out my sister set me up during our family road trip. She blamed me for ruining everything, and my mom took her side again. But the shocking part? What I discovered later didn't just change the trip. It changed the way I saw both of them forever. Tell me where you're watching from in the comments, and subscribe for more stories about family drama, quiet strength, and emotional courage. I should have felt excited that morning. Most people do before a road trip. But as I stood beside my small worn-out suitcase, something inside me felt tight, like my chest was warning me before my mind caught up. Maybe it was the heavy sky, or maybe it was the quiet way my mom kept hovering around my sister, checking her packed bags twice while barely glancing at mine. I told myself I was imagining it, but honestly I wasn't. I knew the pattern. I'd lived it my whole life. I grabbed the handle of my suitcase and walked outside toward Mom's old silver SUV. The tires were dusty from the week before, and a faint smell of leftover coffee lingered inside. My sister Amber was already in the passenger seat, tapping away on her phone like she didn't have a care in the world. She didn't look up when I opened the back door. She just sighed loud enough for me to hear. "Finally," she muttered. "We're gonna be late." I paused for a second, hand on the door, because I wasn't even a minute behind schedule. But I said nothing. I had learned a long time ago that pushing back only made things worse. Mom buckled in and glanced at me through the mirror. "Reena, did you bring the snacks I asked you to pick up yesterday?" "Yes," I said calmly. "They're in the tote bag." Amber let out another loud sigh. Hope she didn't forget anything like last time. Mom didn't correct her. She didn't even look at me. The knot in my chest tightened. We hadn't even left the driveway yet. The tension followed us like a shadow as we pulled out onto the main road. The morning light spilled through the windshield, warm but somehow sharp. Amber scrolled through her phone, humming just loudly enough to make sure I noticed she was ignoring me. Mom focused on the road with that stiff posture she got whenever she silently chose sides. I watched the houses roll past, white fences, trimmed lawns, the neighbor walking his dog. All the normal things you'd expect on a quiet American morning. But I felt anything but normal. There was no big fight, no explosion, no screaming match. Just that slow, familiar ache of being pushed to the edge without anyone saying it outright. A few minutes in, Amber twisted around in her seat. "Reena, did you remember the sunscreen? The good one?" Of course she asked me. She always acted like she was the center of the universe. "Yes," I said. "It's in the same tote bag with the snacks." She stared at me for a moment, like she wanted to find a flaw in my answer. When she didn't, she just scoffed and turned back around. I felt myself shrinking a little, the old habit I hated but couldn't fully shake. Mom reached for the radio and switched to Amber's favorite station. Not mine. Not even neutral. Amber's. She smiled a little at the song that started playing, and Mom shot her a soft grin, one she hadn't shown me all morning. I pressed my head lightly against the window and breathed slowly, trying to loosen the tightness in my shoulders. This trip wasn't supposed to feel like this. It was just a simple weekend drive to a lake town a few hours away. Something small, budget-friendly, nothing fancy. Just a break. At least that's what I thought. But the energy in the SUV felt off. And no matter how I tried to shake it, something deep inside told me this trip was going to hit me harder than I expected. Our first stop was a gas station about 40 minutes away. The kind with bright signs, a squeaky door, and a coffee machine that took forever. I got out, stretched my stiff arms, and headed inside to grab some napkins and a bottle of water. When I came out, Amber was standing by the car with her arms crossed, her foot tapping like she'd been waiting for me for hours. "What took you so long?" she snapped. I looked around confused. I was gone for maybe 3 minutes. Mom closed the trunk harder than necessary. "Reena, we're on a tight schedule. Let's not waste time." I bit the inside of my cheek. There was no schedule, no timeline, no deadline. But I knew what this was. Another moment where I was the easy target. Another moment where saying the truth would only make things worse. Amber slid back into the front seat. I got into the back again quietly, holding the water bottle tighter than I meant to. We drove in silence for a while. About an hour into the trip, the tension rose like steam building under a lid. Amber suddenly tossed her phone onto her lap and turned sharply toward me. "Reena, are you sure you packed everything?" "I mean everything." Mom stiffened. "Why? What did she forget?" I don't know, Amber said dramatically. But she always forgets something. I should have spoken up. I should have said something strong and firm. But the words didn't come. Not because I didn't know what to say, but because nothing I said ever mattered. Mom would choose Amber's version before she even heard mine. It had been this way since high school. Amber messed up, I cleaned it up. Amber forgot, I got blamed. Amber complained, I became the problem. Mom always said, Amber just needs more support. And somehow that meant I had to bend until I almost broke. The worst part? I had accepted it for so long that I barely recognized how wrong it was. But that day, sitting in the back of the SUV with the sunlight flickering through the trees and the road humming beneath us, I felt the first spark of something shift inside me. A tiny, quiet, surprising spark. Maybe awareness. Maybe a crack forming. Maybe the beginning of a breaking point. I didn't know yet. Not then. We stopped at a small roadside viewpoint around noon. A grassy area with a wooden fence and a clear look at the valley below. Families were taking pictures, kids were chasing each other. The air smelled like warm earth and pine trees. Amber stood by the fence, pretending she was in some kind of travel commercial, brushing her hair back dramatically as the breeze lifted it. Mom took a photo. They laughed. I found a shady spot under a nearby tree and sat down. I wasn't upset, just tired. Emotionally tired. The kind that doesn't show on your face but weighs down your entire chest. Mom eventually noticed where I was sitting. What are you doing over there? She called out. Come take a picture with your sister. I stood up and walked toward them, but before I reached the fence, Amber grabbed Mom's arm. No, it's fine. She doesn't want to be part of anything. I froze mid-step. Mom didn't look at me. She just nodded and lifted her phone for another picture of Amber alone. The familiar sting hit my throat again, but this time it lingered longer. I walked back to the tree and watched silently. For a moment I wished I had stayed home. Maybe they would have enjoyed the trip more without me. Maybe I was just filling space they didn't really want filled. But then another thought slipped in, so soft and faint I almost missed it. Why is it always me trying to fit in? Why does no one else try for me? It was the first honest question I had asked myself in years. Even the smallest moments kept adding to the weight. On our next stretch of highway, the car grew warm. Amber became irritated by the heat and asked Mom to turn up the AC. Mom did. Then Amber asked to switch to her playlist. Mom did. Then Amber wanted the window adjusted. Mom did that too. After a while, my own discomfort grew. The cold air blasted on me too strongly, and the seat was stiff. I spoke up gently. Mom, can I adjust the AC just a little? It's really cold back here. Amber rolled her eyes so hard it was almost loud. Seriously? It's barely even cool in here. Mom gave me a quick glance in the mirror. Reena, you'll be fine. Just use your jacket. I didn't have my jacket. Amber did. It was literally sitting next to her in the front seat. I almost laughed at how predictable the moment was. Almost. But my heart wasn't in a laughing place. By the time we stopped in the next small town for lunch, the quiet hurt inside me had grown into something deeper. Not anger. Not sadness. Clarity. We went into a simple family diner. Checkered tablecloths, tall booths, servers who called everyone Han. Mom and Amber took one side of the booth and without discussion I took the other. When the server came, Amber ordered first, then Mom. I opened my mouth to speak, but Amber cut in. She'll have what I'm having. She always copies me. Mom didn't correct her. She didn't even look at me to ask what I wanted. I leaned back in the booth and let out a slow breath, my hands resting in my lap. That spark inside me, the one I felt earlier, glowed a bit stronger. I didn't lash out. I didn't argue. But I saw everything clearly. This trip didn't start with tension. The tension had been there for years. The difference now was that, for the first time, I wasn't brushing it aside. For the first time, I was really seeing it. And that simple shift, quiet as it was about to change everything that came next. When the server placed our plates on the table, the soft clatter of ceramic broke the quiet tension sitting between us. I picked up my fork slowly, feeling the weight of everything that had happened so far pressing into the tiny space of that booth. Mom and Amber carried on a light conversation about the lake, the rental place, and which stores we might visit before checking in. Their voices blended with the hum of the diner. Silverware clinking, chairs scraping, people laughing a few booths over. But in my corner of the booth, everything felt strangely muted. I took a bite of my food, and though the flavor was fine, it tasted like nothing. My stomach felt too tight to really eat. For a moment, I wondered if I was simply being too sensitive. If maybe I was imagining things bigger than they were. But the thought didn't stay long. Deep down I knew the truth. I knew how long this dynamic had existed, and how often I'd been the one carrying blame no matter how carefully I tried stepping around it. After a few quiet minutes, Amber set her fork down with a sharp clink. "We should get going soon," she said dramatically, like someone might stop her. "We're already behind because of the detours." Mom nodded. "Yes, we lost quite a bit of time." "Lost time?" "We hadn't lost anything." I looked up from my plate. "What detours?" I asked. Amber rolled her eyes. "The wrong turn earlier, obviously." I blinked. "We haven't even used the GPS yet." She shrugged like my words didn't matter. "We still got delayed." Mom sighed. "Let's not start anything. We just want to enjoy the trip." There it was, that familiar phrase always thrown out right before someone pinned something on me. I pressed my lips together, unwilling to let frustration show on my face. Instead, I simply nodded and continued eating. But inside, a quiet but firm ache settled deeper. After lunch, we paid, gathered our things, and walked out into the warm sunlight. The breeze carried the smell of fried food from a nearby food truck, mixing with the exhaust from passing cars. As we approached the SUV, Amber paused dramatically and stared at the passenger door. "Mom, did you lock the car?" she asked. Mom looked confused. "I thought I did." Amber tugged the handle and sure enough the door opened. "Seriously?" Amber said loudly, turning toward me as if it made perfect sense to blame me. "Reena, why didn't you check? You got out last." I stared at her. "You got out last. You were on this side." She ignored that completely. "I swear you're so careless sometimes." Mom didn't correct her. Amber slid into the seat, still muttering under her breath. Something inside me snapped. Not loudly, not dramatically. It was a quiet internal shift. A realization that I wasn't imagining anything. That I wasn't overreacting. This trip really was becoming a slow-motion disaster, and somehow I was the only one being assigned as the reason. The next part of the drive was supposed to be straightforward. Just a single long stretch of road leading to the lake town. Amber volunteered to handle navigation. No one asked if I wanted to help. Honestly, I didn't want to. I just hoped the next hours would pass peacefully. First, it seemed like they would. The highway widened, the view opened, and the car filled with sunlight. For a moment, I allowed myself to lean back into the seat and breathe. But peace in our family never lasted long. Half an hour later, Amber suddenly raised her voice. "Mom, turn left here." Oh wait, you missed it." Mom's hands flew up slightly. "You didn't say it in time, Amber." Amber groaned dramatically. "Seriously? Now the whole route is messed up." I lifted my head, confused. "What's messed up?" "We're still on the main road." Amber held up her phone. The GPS recalculated. "It's taking 10 minutes longer now." Mom sighed heavily. "I guess it's fine. But we really didn't need an extra delay today." The way she said we had weight. Heavy weight. Weight that landed directly on me even though I hadn't done a single thing. Amber leaned back in her seat, turning her head just enough to glance at me with a look that suggested I was somehow involved. "This is what I meant earlier," she said to Mom. "Some people just don't pay attention." Some people. Meaning me. I felt my skin warm from frustration, but I kept my tone even. "Amber, you were the one giving directions." She shrugged. "Well, maybe I could have given them sooner if someone wasn't distracting me." I frowned. "I wasn't even talking." "You don't have to talk to be distracting," she said lightly in that sharp, airy tone she always used when she wanted to get under my skin. Mom glanced at me through the mirror. "Reena, can you please not start anything? Amber's trying to help." I stared out the window so they wouldn't see the sting on my face. This wasn't new. But the way it happened so casually, so effortlessly reminded me how easily I was cast in the role of the problem, even when someone else clearly made the mistake. We drove for another hour. The trees thickened, the roads narrowed, and the towns grew smaller. At one point, Amber adjusted the air vents toward herself, then tilted them away without asking. I stayed quiet, hugging my arms to keep warm. Eventually, We approached a small intersection with a faded stop sign. Amber glanced down at her phone, tapped something and pointed. "Mom, turn right here." Mom obeyed without question. The SUV rolled onto a winding rural road. Within minutes, I felt something was off. The trees looked taller, the houses scarcer, and the road signs didn't match anything I remembered from the map earlier when I briefly glanced at it that morning. I leaned forward slightly. "Amber, where's this taking us?" She didn't look back. "The same route." "Relax." It didn't feel like the same route. After another 10 minutes of winding roads and no signs pointing to the lake, Mom sounded nervous. "Amber, are you sure this is correct?" Amber zoomed in on her screen. Yeah, it's fine. Just keep going." She didn't sound confident. Mom swallowed. "I really don't want to backtrack too much. We're already behind because of earlier." Behind. Because of earlier. Because of me somehow. Even though I hadn't done anything. I leaned closer again. "Amber, can I see the GPS?" She held her phone tighter. "No. I've got it." I didn't push. But my uneasiness grew. Sharp turns, patches of gravel, no other cars on the road. Everything felt wrong. Finally, the pavement changed texture, turning rougher. Mom slowed the car down. Amber stared at her phone with wide eyes. Okay. So maybe it recalculated weirdly again." Mom's voice cracked slightly. "Amber, where are we?" Amber didn't answer. I did. "We're not anywhere near the lake road." Amber whipped around. "Okay. How is this my fault? You threw off the GPS earlier when you made all that noise." I blinked. I didn't say a word. "You were fidgeting." "Same thing." Mom's eyes hardened in the mirror. "Reena." The blame was coming. I felt it before she spoke. "Next time, just stay still so Amber can focus." The shock hit me like cold water. "Mom, she made the wrong turn." "I didn't do anything." Amber threw her hands up. "There she goes. Always deflecting." The SUV rolled forward until Mom found a small dirt patch to turn around. She parked and let out a long breath. "This is unbelievable," she muttered. "All this wasted time." She didn't say whose fault it was. She didn't have to. They both turned their frustration toward me as naturally as breathing. The drive back to the main road felt heavier. No music. No chatter. Just the sound of tires crunching along gravel as the air in the SUV thickened. I sat in the back, hands folded, staring at the back of their seats. I didn't feel angry. I felt tired. Deeply tired in a way that touched something old inside me. When we finally reached the correct highway again, Amber fell silent. Not out of guilt, but because she didn't want to discuss it further. Mom cleared her throat. "If we had just stayed on schedule." Her voice trailed off, but her meaning hung in the air. Amber filled the silence. "Some people just don't know how to travel." I inhaled slowly, then exhaled through my nose, grounding myself so I wouldn't break down. But even through the hurt, something unexpected flickered inside me. Not anger. Not bitterness. Something closer to resolve. Something I had never felt strongly enough to act on before. Something that whispered, "This isn't right. This has never been right. And something needs to change." The sun had dipped slightly by the time the town finally appeared ahead of us. Storefronts, signs, small parks, and familiar streets came into view. But none of it brought me relief. My body sat tense, my breathing shallow, my mind replaying every moment of blame thrown my way. Amber scrolled through her phone again, pretending none of it mattered. Mom kept her eyes on the road, her lips pressed tightly together. I looked out the window, watching the passing houses blur by. The mistake Amber made wasn't the problem. It was the disaster she turned it into. The disaster she pinned on me before the truth even had space to breathe. And as the SUV rolled deeper into town, something settled quietly into place inside me. I wasn't going to let this pattern continue. Not after how quickly they turned on me for something I didn't even do. Not anymore. Something inside me had shifted, and that shift was only going to grow. After the chaos of the wrong turn, the SUV was enveloped in a heavy, almost suffocating silence. The sun had started dipping lower in the sky, painting the trees along the roadside in golden hues, but I hardly noticed. Instead, I sat in the back seat, staring blankly out the window, feeling the tension settle like a thick, sticky fog inside the car. Amber and Mom spoke in soft, measured tones up front, words punctuated by the occasional sigh. Their conversation was like a private world I didn't belong to, a bubble from which I was deliberately excluded. Every once in a while, I caught Amber leaning slightly toward Mom, whispering something that made Mom nod, laugh softly, or glance at me with an expression that made it painfully clear whose side she was on. It wasn't loud enough for me to hear exactly what was said, but I didn't need to. I could feel the exclusion, sharp and cold, cutting through the tiny spaces where warmth might have been. It was the kind of silence that wasn't peaceful. It screamed at me louder than any argument ever could. I thought about the countless times this had happened before. In school projects, at family gatherings, even on simple errands around town, it was always the same. Amber stumbled or hesitated. Mom hovered, concerned, but if something went wrong, it was my fault. Always mine. I wondered, not for the first time, why it had become my responsibility to absorb the blame for the family, like some invisible cushion for their mistakes. And why, after so many years, it still stung just as sharply as the first time. For a moment, I imagined turning the car around and heading home. I imagined packing my bags, walking out the driveway, and leaving Amber and Mom to their trip. It was a tempting thought. The peace of being away from the subtle judgments, the whispered critiques, the way the world seemed to tilt against me whenever I tried to assert myself. But I didn't. I stayed silent, hands resting in my lap, gripping the edge of my backpack tightly. Part of me hoped that if I stayed quiet, things might smooth over once we reached the lake town. Perhaps they'd settle, and the trip wouldn't feel like a battlefield. But the hope was fragile. By the time we pulled off the highway into a small roadside town, it was clear that peace wasn't coming. We stopped at a tiny diner, a place that smelled faintly of frying bacon and old coffee, with checkered floors and booths that had seen better decades. I was the last to get out, taking a deep breath of the humid air, feeling slightly relieved to stretch my legs. Amber and Mom had already grabbed a booth by the window, leaving me to awkwardly shuffle to the empty seat across the aisle, feeling conspicuously out of place. The diner had the usual morning crowd. A group of older men playing cards in the corner, a young couple laughing over pancakes, and the waitress bustling between tables with an effortless cheer. And yet, the warmth of the place couldn't touch me. Amber immediately launched into chatter about the lake, what they planned to do first, which rental spot looked best, how Mom should book the canoe ride. Mom laughed softly, nodding along, her voice light and casual. But when I tried to make a small comment about perhaps grabbing a map from the counter, I was met with a dismissive look from Amber and a maybe later Reena from Mom. I sat there sipping my lukewarm coffee, feeling smaller than my chair, smaller than the table, smaller than the day itself. The conversation floated around me like a cloud I couldn't penetrate. Even when I tried to interject gently, to add a harmless observation about the diner or the route, they brushed me aside so naturally that I felt like a ghost. Invisible. The kind of invisibility that leaves no mark, but leaves your chest hollow. Amber, of course, noticed. She leaned over Mom's shoulder, whispering something that made Mom smile and nod again. Their glances, their subtle shared jokes, the soft tilt of their heads toward each other. It all spoke volumes. It wasn't what they said. It was how they didn't include me. How they didn't need me to validate their thoughts because they already had each other. I tried not to let it show, tried to focus on the steaming mug in front of me, but my mind wandered. I replayed every family trip, every gathering, every time I had felt this same pattern. The subtle undermining, the quiet favoritism. The way Amber's mistakes were brushed off while my smallest misstep became a grand catastrophe. I remembered the time we drove to the beach and Mom insisted Amber pack extra towels while I got stuck hauling the cooler, only for Amber to lose a bag and blame me. I remembered school plays, camping trips, even shopping errands. It had been happening for years. And yet, here I was being treated as though this was my fault again. As though I was the reason the trip had already felt tense before we even reached the lake. I shifted in the booth, trying to stretch my stiff back, but the weight of the exclusion pressed down harder than my legs could stretch. Amber laughed lightly at something Mom said, and I noticed Mom's eyes crinkle with amusement. I caught the warmth they shared, and it made the hollowness in my chest ache all the more. It was a subtle, quiet betrayal. No yelling, no throwing of objects, just a seamless erasure of my presence in their little world. After a few minutes, Amber excused herself to use the restroom, and Mom leaned back slightly. I thought maybe, just maybe, the dynamic would change with her out of earshot. But even then, Mom didn't look at me in a way that invited conversation. She returned to scanning her phone for updates about our lake rental. I felt the sharp sting again. I was not invisible because of Amber, I was invisible because Mom allowed it, encouraged it even with her lack of acknowledgement. When Amber returned, she carried herself with that practiced air of superiority, a smugness I could almost see radiating off her. She sat down with a dramatic sigh, dropping her napkin in a way that drew Mom's attention immediately. They exchanged a glance, and I knew without a word that some private joke or commentary had been shared again. We finished our meal in the same tense silence I had entered. Amber and Mom discussed nothing directly with me, speaking as though my presence was optional, and for the first time on this trip, I allowed myself to feel the deep sting of that exclusion fully. It wasn't anger yet. It was a profound recognition of my role in their dynamic, the unspoken rule that my feelings could be set aside without consequence. By the time we left the diner, the sky was beginning to turn a pale shade of evening. The SUV hummed back to life as we drove into the narrowing roads leading toward the lake town. The air felt cooler now, the kind of clean, sharp freshness that usually lifted my mood, but it didn't. Not today. I stared out the window, watching the horizon blur past, feeling entirely disconnected from the conversation up front. Amber was scrolling her phone again, occasionally leaning toward Mom with that quiet conspiratorial air. Mom's fingers tapped absent-mindedly against the steering wheel, nodding along at whatever was whispered. I didn't speak. I didn't need to. The silent treatment had already said too much. Every glance I wasn't receiving, every laugh I wasn't included in, every simple acknowledgement I had been denied. It screamed louder than any argument. The quiet between us wasn't peaceful. It was a statement. Later that night, after we had settled into the small Airbnb cabin we'd rented, the dynamic shifted but in a different, more painful way. I unpacked my bag quietly in the corner of the room while Mom and Amber discussed the plan for dinner. Amber's voice carried over my head, playful, almost innocent in tone, but I could hear the undercurrent immediately. And she literally made us get lost, Mom. I don't know how she even drives sometimes, Amber said, exaggerating each word, making it sound worse than it had been. Mom laughed lightly, though there was a tinge of worry there. Well, it happens. But I think we made it out okay in the end. Amber tilted her head, a sly little smirk in her voice. Yeah, but you should have seen her, Mom. She didn't even notice. She just kept sitting there like nothing was wrong. It was, I don't know, weird. I froze mid-motion, the toothpaste tube slipping from my fingers. My stomach clenched as I realized she was retelling the story, twisting the facts, and painting me in the worst possible light. She was charming, persuasive, even making it sound like I had caused the chaos deliberately, or at least through some monumental incompetence. Mom didn't question her. She didn't check with me. I watched them both sit on the small sofa, leaning in slightly toward each other as if conspiring, while I was left in the corner, a silent observer of my own humiliation. I considered speaking up. I considered defending myself. But the fatigue of the day, the emotional drain, and the pattern I knew so well stopped me. I sat on the edge of my bed quietly, letting the words float around me without trying to catch them, silently acknowledging that my presence was once again minimized. Even in that small cabin room, the tension hung like a dense fog. Every creak of the floor, every rustle of the thin curtains in the evening breeze, every laugh from the living room was a reminder. I wasn't the one included. I wasn't the one who mattered most in this small family microcosm. And yet I couldn't leave. Not yet. So I stayed quiet. I breathed deeply, letting the rise and fall of my chest be the only rhythm I controlled. My mind replayed everything, the wrong turn, the whispered conspiracies in the diner, the subtle sidelining, and slowly a quiet determination started to form. This silence, this treatment that spoke louder than words, was not something I would ignore forever. It hurt. It was unfair. It was deliberate. But it also reminded me of something crucial. I could observe. I could notice. And I could remember. By the time the lights were out, I was exhausted in every sense. Physically, mentally, emotionally. I lay in the small twin bed, staring at the ceiling, hearing Amber's muffled voice as she and Mom planned what they'd do the next morning. I felt small, invisible, unheard. But underneath it all, that tiny spark, the one that had flickered during the wrong turn earlier, flickered again. And in the quiet of that cabin room I realized, Silence could speak. And if I listened closely enough, I might just learn how to make my own voice matter in a way they could no longer ignore. That concludes Heading 3. The silent treatment that said too much in 1500 immersive words. Continuing naturally from Heading 2 and fully respecting your guidelines. Cinematic, conversational, realistic, emotional, and focused only on the heading. The morning after that tense night, I woke before anyone else in the Airbnb. The room was quiet except for the faint hum of the heating unit, and a soft golden light spilled through the thin curtains. I stretched stiffly, my muscles sore from sitting tense all day, but my mind was restless. I replayed the previous hours over and over, the whispered blame, the silent treatment, the way Mom and Amber had laughed and plotted as if I didn't exist. I got out of bed carefully, trying not to wake anyone, and walked to the small kitchen area. The faint smell of last night's dinner lingered, mixed with the sharp aroma of pine from the air freshener in the corner. I poured myself a glass of water, leaning against the counter, and stared blankly at the floor. My thoughts swirled like the sunlight catching dust motes in the room. I tried to shake off the exhaustion and the humiliation, but the feeling of being unseen lingered like a heavy fog. I decided to step outside for a moment, hoping the cool morning air would clear my head. The cabin sat on a small hill, and from the porch, I could see the lake shimmering in the distance. The mist hovered above the surface, giving everything an ethereal, almost unreal quality. I took a deep breath, letting the crisp air fill my lungs, and for a fleeting second, I imagined leaving this trip behind. Packing my things, walking out, finally shaking off the familiar weight of blame. But I didn't. Something inside me told me that the answers I needed were still here. As I leaned on the railing, I noticed a piece of paper sticking out from the small pile of brochures Mom had left on the table in the living room. Curiosity pricked at me. I walked back inside quietly, careful to step lightly so I wouldn't alert Amber or Mom, and picked it up. It was a receipt for a local store, one that I hadn't been aware Mom or Amber had visited. And alongside it, I found a small note in Amber's handwriting. At first glance it seemed trivial, just a casual list. But as I read it more carefully, a chill ran down my spine. The note mentioned every little mistake that Reena had supposedly made during the trip. Except some of the things she listed didn't happen. She had twisted details, exaggerated events, and even created scenarios that were impossible, all carefully designed to make it look like I was incompetent, careless, or unhelpful. The more I read, the more my stomach twisted. Amber had been actively rewriting reality, feeding Mom a version of the story where I was at fault, making me the scapegoat once again. I sank into the chair, my hands trembling slightly as I realized the depth of it. 2 days of tension, silent treatment, and subtle humiliation weren't just happenstance. They were orchestrated. My mind raced, trying to piece together every whispered conversation, every laugh I had overheard, every time Mom had glanced at me without speaking. It all suddenly made sense in a way that was both horrifying and clarifying. I thought about confronting them immediately, but I paused. I wanted evidence, I wanted clarity. I wanted to make sure that when I did speak, it wasn't my word against theirs. I glanced around the cabin, my eyes landing on Mom's laptop bag in the corner. Quietly I approached it, heart pounding. Inside I found a small folder labeled Trip Notes. My fingers trembled as I opened it, revealing a series of typed notes. Amber's observations, her accidents, her interpretations of every move I had made. Every line was a distortion of reality. Every word painted me as the instigator, the source of every disruption, the problem of the trip. I read each page carefully, feeling a mix of disbelief, anger, and something deeper, validation. Finally, after years of being blamed unfairly, I had undeniable proof that the pattern wasn't in my head. It had never been. The realization was both terrifying and liberating. I had been patient, cautious, and quiet, trying to survive within a family system that consistently painted me as the villain. But this was tangible. This was a map of manipulation I could follow, a clear view of how Amber had meticulously constructed the narrative to her advantage. I heard footsteps behind me and froze. Mom was coming into the room carrying a mug of coffee. She didn't notice me at first, scanning the table and the brochures, and then her eyes landed on the folder in my hands. Her expression shifted immediately, confusion, quickly masked by a casual smile. "Oh, just looking at the local attractions," she asked, her voice light. but I caught the subtle tension underneath. I closed the folder slowly, my hand steady now. "Yeah," I said. "I was just curious about what's around here." I held her gaze, careful not to betray the storm of emotions inside me. Mom nodded slowly, setting her mug down. "Well, we'll probably figure it out together later. Amber has some ideas too." Amber's voice came from the hallway, sharp and cheerful, but it didn't reach me. I was focused now, fully alert. The discovery had shifted something in me. I wasn't just the quiet observer anymore. I was someone who had proof. Someone who could act, who could reclaim a small piece of the respect I had been denied for years. By midday, I decided to take a walk around the property, letting the folder stay hidden in my room. The lake was visible through the thin forest that lined the edge of the cabin property, and the sunlight bounced off the water in patterns that seemed almost hypnotic. I let my thoughts settle, replaying Amber's note and the receipts in my mind. I tried to imagine how to approach this without exploding in anger or giving them an excuse to dismiss me again. I walked down to a small dock, the wood creaking under my weight, and sat at the edge. The water rippled gently, reflecting the clouds above. I thought about everything: the last 2 days, the silent treatment, the subtle exclusion, the whispered blame. And I realized that this moment, this clarity, was mine alone. I didn't need anyone to validate it yet. I didn't need their acknowledgement. What I needed was the truth, and now I had it. Returning to the cabin, I placed the folder carefully on my bed. Amber and Mom were chatting in the living room, laughing lightly about what they might do next. But I no longer felt small or invisible. I felt quiet power, the kind that comes from knowing something that others don't, from understanding the true patterns behind actions that had seemed random or unfair. Later that evening, I found a private moment to review every detail again. Amber's notes, receipts, and small manipulations were laid out in front of me. I realized she hadn't just exaggerated, she had planned it. Every wrong turn, every minor inconvenience, every miscommunication, they had all been reframed to make her the hero and me the villain. And Mom, knowingly or unknowingly, had enabled it. But this wasn't just about blame anymore. It was about clarity, awareness, and strategy. I knew how the narrative had been constructed. I could anticipate the next moves. And I could decide how to respond, not out of anger, not impulsively, but with purpose. That night, while Amber slept lightly in the adjacent room and Mom's breathing was steady and even, I lay in bed thinking. I didn't feel victorious yet. I didn't feel triumphant. But I felt awake, fully awake for the first time in years regarding my position in the family. This small Airbnb room, this quiet night, held the realization that things didn't have to remain the same. That silence and manipulation could be met with awareness, strategy, and calm determination. I knew what I had discovered would change everything. Not immediately, perhaps, and not necessarily in the way Amber or Mom expected. But the power of knowing the truth, of seeing the manipulation for what it was mine now. And for the first time, I felt like the story of the trip, the disaster they had blamed on me, was not theirs to control anymore. By the time I finally drifted off to sleep, the folder safely tucked beside me, I had already begun forming a plan. It wouldn't be cruel. It wouldn't be reactive. It would be precise, calm, and undeniable. The patterns, the lies, the blame, they would no longer be invisible. And I, for the first time in a long time, would be the one holding the lens through which reality was seen. The morning light filtered softly through the Airbnb curtains, dust motes dancing lazily in the golden glow. I lay in bed longer than usual, listening to the faint sounds of Amber rustling about, Mom humming as she made coffee in the kitchen. My heart was unusually calm, a quiet contrast to the storm that had filled the previous days. I felt awake in a way I hadn't before, like I could see everything clearly for the first time. Every whisper, every sidelong glance, every moment of exclusion from the past days and years. Suddenly, I could trace them all. I sat up, folding my legs beneath me on the small twin bed, and took a deep breath. Today I decided things would be different. I wouldn't shout. I wouldn't cry. I wouldn't retreat. I would speak, calmly but firmly, for myself. And I knew exactly how I wanted to do it. I started by going over the events of the trip in my mind, the wrong turn, the silent treatment, Amber's whispered exaggerations, and Mom's subtle siding with her. Every distorted version Amber had crafted was clear now in my memory. I didn't feel anger yet, not the explosive kind, but I felt resolve. I needed to present the facts, yes, but more importantly, I needed to show them that I was no longer invisible. I waited until Mom and Amber were seated in the kitchen, coffee in hand, Amber scrolling on her phone while Mom glanced over the morning news. The quiet domesticity of the moment made my nerves tingle with anticipation. This was the calm before the confrontation, and for some reason that calm made me more centered. I walked into the kitchen slowly, keeping my steps even. "Mom, Amber," I said softly, catching their attention. "Can we talk for a minute?" Amber looked up with a faint smirk, already anticipating that I would apologize for something. Mom's expression was neutral, though I could feel the subtle tension behind her eyes. "Sure, Reena," Mom said. "What's on your mind?" I took a deep breath, gripping the folder of notes and receipts I had discovered 2 nights ago. I set it on the counter between us, sliding it toward them. "I want to show you something," I said, keeping my voice calm but firm. "It's about the last couple of days." Amber's eyebrows lifted slightly, a look of curiosity mixed with the usual trace of superiority. "Oh," she said, a hint of challenge in her tone. "Yes," I said. "It's everything that happened, the wrong turns, the delays, and what was said about me afterward. I've kept notes and receipts, and I want you to see them." Mom glanced at the folder, her lips pressing together. "Reena, are you sure?" "I'm sure," I interrupted gently, meeting her gaze. "I just want the truth out in the open." I opened the folder and began pointing to the notes, calmly walking through each distortion Amber had written down. I explained the timeline, the miscommunications, and the exaggerated mistakes that had been pinned on me. I stayed steady, measured, refusing to let my voice shake even as my pulse thudded in my chest. Amber leaned back, initially trying to dismiss what I was saying. "Reena, you're making a big deal out of nothing," she said lightly, attempting to minimize the impact. But as I continued to present each discrepancy with evidence, I noticed her confident posture start to falter. She shifted in her seat, glancing at Mom for support. Mom frowned, flipping through the notes I had laid out. Her eyes moved from page to page, lingering on the receipts, Amber's handwritten distortions, and the notes detailing every subtle manipulation. For the first time, I saw uncertainty cross her face. It was subtle, but it was there. "Amber," I said, keeping my tone calm but firm, "I need you to understand that the way you've presented all of this makes me out to be the problem. But when you exaggerate, omit facts, or twist what really happened, it's unfair. And it's hurtful." Amber opened her mouth, probably to counter, but I held up a hand. "I'm not trying to fight. I'm not trying to make you feel bad. I just want the truth to be clear, what actually happened." The kitchen was silent except for the faint ticking of a small wall clock. Amber's gaze flickered between me and Mom, the confident facade slowly crumbling. I could feel the shift, the subtle crack in the narrative she had built so carefully. Mom finally spoke, her voice quieter than usual. "Reena, I didn't realize." "It's okay, Mom," I said, softer now, sensing her genuine confusion. "I know you trust Amber and want to protect her. But sometimes protecting someone means acknowledging the truth, even when it's uncomfortable." Amber's mouth opened again, but I continued. "I'm not here to blame. I'm here to make sure everyone understands the reality. I've been blamed for things I didn't do for years. And I'm done letting that happen." There was a long pause. Amber's shoulders slumped slightly, a sign of resignation. Mom's eyes softened and she finally nodded. "I see," she said slowly. "I didn't realize how much this had affected you." I took a deep breath, letting some of the tension drain from my chest. "It's not about punishment or anger," I explained. "It's about fairness, about seeing things as they actually happened." Amber finally spoke, her tone quieter than I had ever heard from her in situations like this. I didn't think it mattered. I didn't think you noticed." I looked at her steadily. "It mattered. And I noticed. I notice every time I made the problem for things that aren't my fault." For the first time, the room felt balanced. The tension was still there, but it no longer felt like I was drowning in it alone. Mom nodded and Amber fidgeted slightly, probably processing the fact that her manipulations had been fully exposed. I realized then that speaking up wasn't about confrontation or proving dominance. It was about acknowledgement, about making my presence felt, my experiences recognized, my voice heard. We spent the next hour talking. Carefully, Calmly, I walked them through the events, the emotions, the silent exclusions, and the ways Amber had twisted reality. Mom listened, occasionally glancing at Amber with an expression that mixed concern and realization. Amber listened too, and I could see the shift in her. The casual smugness was gone, replaced with a subtle awareness that she had gone too far. At one point, Amber leaned forward and said quietly, "I didn't mean to hurt you. I thought I was just venting." I nodded, not harshly but with firmness. "Vent if you need to, but not at my expense. Words matter. And silence can hurt just as much as anything else. I've felt invisible for too long, and I'm done feeling that way." Mom reached across the table and touched my hand. "I'm sorry, Reena. I really am. I should have seen this sooner." It was enough. Not everything was fixed, not every scar was erased, but it was the start. It was the acknowledgement I had needed for so many years. Later, as we packed up to leave the Airbnb, Amber stayed close, quieter than usual. Mom glanced at me, offering a small, sincere smile. And I felt it, the subtle shift, the awareness that my voice mattered. That the day I finally spoke up had changed the story, if not entirely, then at least enough that I was no longer the invisible scapegoat. The drive back to the lake was different. We talked genuinely about plans and sights. Amber asked me for advice on the route. Mom asked for my opinion about the rental activities. I gave them my input and they listened. And when a small detour arose, no blame was cast. We navigated it together. A team in a way that felt almost alien after years of tension. When we finally reached the lake, I stepped out of the SUV, stretching my legs and taking in the sparkling water and the gentle breeze. For the first time on this trip, I felt present, acknowledged, and free, not because the trip itself had changed, but because I had changed. I had claimed my voice. I had demanded recognition. And in doing so, I had finally shifted the balance. That evening, as the sun dipped behind the trees and painted the lake in soft oranges and pinks, I sat on the dock alone for a few quiet moments. The water lapped gently against the wooden posts, a soothing rhythm that mirrored the calm settling inside me. I thought about all the silent, hurtful days of being blamed, all the manipulations, all the exclusions, and I realized none of that power could touch me anymore. Not if I spoke, not if I held my ground, and not if I refused to let the narrative of my life be written without my input. Amber came down the dock a few minutes later, hesitating. She sat a few feet away from me. "Reena, I'm sorry," she said softly. "I didn't realize how much I was hurting you. I promise I'll try to do better." I nodded, feeling the weight of those words sink in. "Thank you," I said. "That's all I needed. Just acknowledgement." Mom joined us shortly after, and for the first time in years I felt like a part of the family, not a scapegoat, not the invisible one, not the one blamed for everything. I had spoken, they had listened, and the silence that had been suffocating for so long had finally lifted. That night I slept deeply, the kind of sleep that comes from relief and resolution. I knew challenges would come again. Old patterns don't disappear overnight, but I also knew something fundamental had shifted. The day I finally spoke up for myself had changed everything. Not just the trip, not just my relationship with Mom and Amber, but the way I saw myself. I was no longer invisible. I was seen. I was heard. I had taken my voice back.